A girl left the gym and headed home just a few hundred yards away, but she never made it, sparking a massive police search. Over time, this case turned into one of the most notorious in modern Italy, leaving millions in shock. No one could have imagined that the twists and turns of this story would rival any detective movie, or that something like this could happen in real life. Yara Gambirasio was born on May 21, 1997, in a small Italian town called Bimbate di Sopra. This quiet place, not far from Milan, has a population of just over 7,000 people and is known for its peaceful life, old architecture, and beautiful nature. Yara's family had lived there for generations. She had loving parents, an older sister, and two younger brothers. Yara loved her hometown. She went to the local school, had lots of friends, and was very active in gymnastics. Just a few hundred yards from her home was a big sports center, and Yara went there almost every week. On November 26, 2010, when she was 13, she planned to swing by the gym quickly to return a stereo to her coach. Around 5:15 p.m., she said goodbye to her parents and headed out, saying she'd be back in about an hour. Yara's parents weren't worried about letting her go out alone, despite her age. Their town was very safe, and the walk to the gym only took a few minutes. But that evening, they started to get concerned because Yara was late. By 7 p.m., she still hadn't come back, which was unusual. At 7:11, her mom tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. This really worried her parents, so they immediately contacted the police. The case was referred to a police department in a larger nearby city, about 7 miles away, and an experienced detective, Letizia Ruggeri, was assigned to handle Yara's disappearance. She immediately sent officers to the town to start the search and also called in the military police for help. After talking with Yara's parents, they went to the gym to piece together her last movements. Yara's coach confirmed she had come by around 5:30 p.m. Her friends also said they saw Yara, shaded with her, watched her do some exercises, and then saw her leave for home. The police also learned that at 6:44 p.m., Yara had sent a text to her friend, which was the last time anyone heard from her. So the investigators determined that Yara disappeared somewhere between the sports complex and her home on her way back. They split into several groups, with one coming to streets and another searching for witnesses and other clues like CCTV footage. Several people who were near the sports center that evening reported seeing a girl who looked like Yara. They said she was speaking with two men near a red car, but the police couldn't confirm if it was really her. They searched the entire sports center but didn't find Yara. Meanwhile, local and military police officers were scouring the streets, fields, and the banks of a small river running through the town. Firefighters and volunteers also joined the search, but no one could find Yara. The detective then called in canine units. The search dogs picked up Yara's scent from her belongings, but instead of leading the police from the sports center towards her home, the dogs indicated that Yara had moved in the opposite direction towards a small town called Mapello. The TTS also requested Yara's cell phone location data, which showed that her phone had connected to a tower in Mapello at 6:49 p.m., just 5 minutes after she sent a text to her friend. Given the distance from the sports center, it was almost certain that Yara couldn't have gotten there on foot, so she must have been transported by a vehicle. At this point, Yara's trail went cold, and the police had two main theories. The first and most likely was that she had been kidnapped. The second was that she might have run away, but there were serious doubts about this. In her last message, she had made plans to meet her friend the next day, making it hard to believe she would decide to run away just minutes later. Despite their doubts, the investigator interviewed all of Yara's relatives and friends, but nothing indicated any issues at home. The TTO ordered wiretaps on the phones of all family members and several dozen other people. She took a bold step and requested cell phone location data for every phone that was in Maypello on the evening of Yara's disappearance. If it was indeed a kidnapping, the perpetrator's phone would have connected to the towers in the area, but identifying the culprit would still be extremely challenging. In total, the police received information on 15,000 phones that were in the town that evening. They attempted to scrutinize each of these individuals, and a special team was set up to monitor thousands of numbers that seemed suspicious for various reasons. Meanwhile, active searches for Yara continued, but day after day they yielded no results. The TZ had begun to doubt that they would make any progress this way, and her last hope rested on the cell phone numbers, one of which had to belong to the kidnapper. Within a few days, the police had listened to thousands of hours of phone conversations, but none of them were related to Yara's disappearance. This continued until late November, when one of the officers suddenly heard a highly suspicious phrase. A man on the phone said, "Forgive me, Lord, I didn't kill her." Investigators quickly identified the man as Mohammed Fikri, a construction worker from Morocco who lived in the same town where Yara's phone signal had last been detected. The police tried to locate him, but there was a problem. The team monitoring the phone conversations was listening to recordings with a few days' delay because it was impossible to process so many calls in real time. Fikri's call was only heard 3 days after it was made, and by the time the police became interested in him, he was already on a ship heading to Morocco. All of this looks extremely suspicious, so the Italian authorities decided to intercept the ship. They found the man, arrested him, and brought him back to Italy. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered another chilling clue. They found Fikri's car and discovered a mattress with blood stains in the trunk. The mattress was immediately sent to the lab, but here the police faced an unexpected twist. The blood didn't belong to Yara, and apparently wasn't even human. Upon further analysis of the cell phone recording, it was revealed that Fikri had said something completely different in his native language, and the officer had mistranslated the second part of the phrase. After conducting additional checks, investigators confirmed that Fikri had nothing to do with Yara's disappearance, and they had to release him. By that time, Yara's case had become one of the most well-known topics across Italy, with extensive coverage in the national media. Millions of people followed the search efforts, hoping she would be found alive. When news of Fikri's arrest hit the papers, many were convinced that the kidnapper had finally been caught, so the news of his innocence came as a shock and disappointment. It meant the investigators were back to square one, with no other leads to help them find Yara. The police continued to monitor phone conversations, search for other evidence, and do everything they could, but nothing seemed to lead anywhere. This continued for exactly 3 months until February 26, 2011. On that day, a man from a small town 6 miles from Yara's home went to one of the many nearby fields to fly his remote-controlled airplane, but the airplane had some issues and he had to land it in a spot with tall, thick grass to prevent it from crashing into the ground. When he went to retrieve it, he noticed a pile of rags. At first, he didn't think much of it, but then he saw boots sticking out from under the pile and decided to call the police. Officers found a human body under the rags, but the level of decomposition made it almost impossible to visually identify the victim. However, when the TTR arrived at the scene, she immediately knew. It was Yara. She was wearing the same clothes she had on when she went to the sports complex 3 months earlier. Near the body, they also found her iPad, house keys, SIM card, and the removable battery from her cell phone. But the phone itself was nowhere to be found. Italy's most renowned forensic pathologist was brought in to examine the remains and concluded that the cause of death was multiple stab wounds. She also found no signs of assault, but the fact that some of her clothing was removed led investigators to suggest that this was the motive. Experts also found fibers on the body that were commonly used in a specific type of fabric. This suggested that the killer might work in a related manufacturing facility somewhere in the area. Additionally, they found two foreign DNA samples, one on the victim's gloves and another on the battery over smartphone. However, there were several issues. The samples were quite small, making it difficult to extract a full profile. There were also no matches in the various databases, so the investigators found themselves at another dead end. But 2 months later, Letitia received an unexpected call. Experts from the lab reported that, upon further investigation of the victim's belongings, they had discovered biological material on her underwear, and the analysis yielded a full DNA profile of an unknown man. With the killer's DNA in hand, the TIA divided the officers into different teams and assigned them specific tasks. Some were responsible for collecting DNA samples from all of Yarda's relatives, acquaintances, and everyone at the sports complex. Others focused on analyzing cell phone location data, compiling a list of numbers belonging to people who traveled from Yarda's town to Mapello that evening, and then collecting their DNA samples. Given the scale of these tests, she had to wait weeks for results, which were slow in coming. Even with 3 laboratories across Italy working on the DNA samples, the process could take years. In the following months, the police collected thousands of DNA samples, but none matched the killer's profile. Meanwhile, Letitia kept thinking how to get new leads, and soon she had an idea. Not far from the field where Yara's body was found, there was a nightclub. Letitia knew that killers often leave their victims' bodies in familiar areas, and this club had a reputation for being a hotspot for people with criminal records and other shady individuals. So she decided to try this theory and collect DNA samples from all the visitors of that nightclub. Letitia assigned several officers to stand guard at the nightclub on Fridays and Saturdays, collecting DNA samples from everyone entering. Since all clubgoers had membership cards, investigators could access information on everyone who had visited the club in the past. Although Letitia knew the chances of success were slim, she wanted to try everything in her power due to the lack of other leads. And soon she received a call from the lab. DNA from one of the visitors matched the killer's profile. The man's name was Domiano, but there was a problem. The match was only partial, and Domiano was quickly cleared as a suspect since he was on another continent at the time of Yara's disappearance. But still, this was a significant breakthrough. Experts assumed that since his DNA only partially matched the killer's profile, Domiano must be related to the actual perpetrator. The TTN, or team, began investigating Domiano's family to identify the most likely suspect. Since this was before genetic genealogy became common in criminal investigations, this method was new and extremely challenging. They soon made a surprising discovery. Domiano's mother had worked as a housekeeper for Yara's family for 10 years, but left the job a few years ago. When she found out that someone from her family might be the killer, the woman was deeply shocked. Despite this revelation, the search for the suspect dragged on for many months. Letitia eventually concluded that none of Domiano's immediate relatives were Yara's murderer, which meant they would need to investigate hundreds, if not thousands, of distant relatives. As months passed without progress, the media began accusing Letitia and her team of incompetence and reluctance to work on the case. Several politicians joined in, trying to have the detective removed, but they were unsuccessful. Despite the heavy pressure, Letitia continued to do everything in her power to identify the killer. She and her team examined various family trees and archival records dating back to 1716. They had to review thousands of individuals repeatedly, hitting dead ends. This continued until September 2011, when investigators finally made a breakthrough. One family tree led them to a man named Giuseppe, who was already deceased. However, his widow had preserved some postmarks with his saliva, and experts managed to extract a DNA profile. The results showed that Giuseppe was very likely the father or grandfather of the killer, whose DNA was found on the victim's underwear. Giuseppe had 2 sons, and investigators obtained their DNA samples, but they faced another unexpected disappointment. Although the results showed a close match, neither of the sons was the killer. This left Leticia stumped. The killer had to be closely related to this family, but none of the male members showed a complete match. The only remaining possibility was that Giuseppe might have had a child with another woman, a child his family knew nothing about. Detectives focused on this lead, but uncovering such sensitive information proved extremely difficult. They interviewed thousands of people who might have known or seen Giuseppe during his lifetime. Nearly a year later, they got an intriguing clue. Since the 1960s, Giuseppe had been visiting a spa complex in a small town near Milan without his wife. He stayed there for 2 weeks every May and never brought his family along. The TTS requested records of all visitors to the spa complex during those years. To her surprise, these documents were still available, and investigators began examining them. They compiled a list of all the women who stayed at the spa during the same time as Giuseppe. This process stretched over a year, but the TTS still couldn't get any closer to identifying Giuseppe's possible lover. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of what they were doing, and the theory about a secret child sparked widespread interest across Italy. Journalists eager to capitalize on this attention began their own searches for children born from extramarital affairs. To their surprise, they uncovered many such stories. In one small village, for example, they found 5 such children. This continued until 2014, when investigators finally made some progress. With the widespread attention on the case and the search for Giuseppe's possible lover, the police received numerous tips, but all of them led to dead ends. But in the summer of that year, they received the tips suggesting that Giuseppe might have had an affair with a woman named Esther Artsufi. Reviewing their records, investigators suddenly discovered that they had already collected a DNA sample from Esther 2 years earlier. However, the results showed she was not related to the killer. Still, Leticia decided to request a new analysis, and the results were shocking. It turned out that the initial expert had mistakenly compared the killer's DNA with Yara's DNA instead of Esther's. When a different expert re-examined the correct samples, they found that Esther was indeed the killer's mother. With the long-awaited confirmation in hand, Leticia discovered that Esther had 3 children, including twins, a boy and a girl who fit the age profile. Although the twins were considered the children of Esther's legal husband, investigators suspected that in reality Giuseppe was the biological father. Since the killer was clearly male, they focused on Esther's son. At the time of the investigation, he was 42 years old, worked as a construction worker, and lived with his wife and children in Marpello, the same town where Yara's cell phone signal had disappeared. Leticia quickly came up with a plan to obtain his DNA sample without spooking him. She learned that he used a specific road every day and arranged a sobriety checkpoint there. The man, unaware of the real reason, blew into the breathalyzer, which was immediately sent to the lab with his saliva. Almost 4 years after the murder, Leticia finally received long-awaited confirmation. His DNA fully matched the biological sample found on Yara's underwear. This man's name was Massimo Bassetti, and on June 16th, he was finally arrested. Bassetti denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he was innocent, so the case went to trial. During the preparations, investigators uncovered several alarming facts that indirectly implicated Bassetti. His browser history showed searches of an unaccepted nature related to minors. On the evening of Yara's disappearance, his cell phone was located in her town, but was turned off at 5:45 p.m. and not turned on again until the next morning. The city's car was captured on surveillance footage near the sports center on the same evening, just minutes before Yara vanished. The car had no license plates, making it difficult to identify the driver before Bassetti's arrest. Now it was confirmed to be Bassetti's vehicle. Interestingly, fibers from his car seats matched the fibers found on the victim's body. The prosecution also called a witness who lived in Yara's town. The woman testified that on the evening of the disappearance, she had gone outside to take out the trash when she saw a car speeding by her house. According to her description, the vehicle resembled Bassetti's car and she saw a child inside. She added that she heard screams coming from the car. Police also discovered that Bassetti frequently stopped at a pizza restaurant on the same street as Yara's home. This suggested that he might have seen her long before the abduction and possibly had been planning the crime in advance. Regarding the surveillance footage, Bassetti claimed he was simply driving home from work that evening, but investigators found that he did not work that day, which was confirmed by his colleagues' testimony, CCTV footage, and cell phone location data. The trial began in the summer of 2015, a year after Bassetti's arrest, and it quickly captured the attention of millions across Italy. While most people were sure that Bassetti was the killer, no one could have anticipated the twist this trial would reveal. The prosecution's version was clear. The city had likely been watching Yara for days or even weeks before deciding to abduct her after she left the sports complex alone. He then took her to the field where her body was later discovered and killed her. The main theory was that the city had intended to assault her, but for some reason he didn't go through with it. The city's wife testified that he was home with the family having dinner at the time Yara went missing. But this was contradicted by CCTV footage near the sports complex and 3 witnesses who saw the city's car at the time he claimed to be at home. The defense argued that their client was innocent. The city himself claimed he often had nosebleeds, which could have gotten on his clothes and tools. His lawyer suggested that the real killer might have somehow come into contact with the city's blood before the crime, which then ended up on the victim's underwear. The defense also challenged the DNA evidence, claiming that a mistake might have been made. They explained that there are 2 types of DNA, one that changes significantly between relatives and another one that changes significantly between relatives and another one that changes very slowly over generations. The DNA found on the victim's underwear was of the slower changing type, so the defense argued that it could belong to anyone related to Bassetti, whether close or distant. But the prosecution's experts countered this, insisting that Bassetti's DNA matched the evidence beyond any doubt. But that wasn't the defense's main argument. During the trial, they dropped a bombshell that caused a huge stir. They named a new suspect, a gym instructor named Sylvia. It turned out that after the body was discovered, experts found Sylvia's blood on the sleeve of Yara's jacket. Sylvia's father revealed that when she came home after Yara's disappearance, she had been crying all night. Investigators also discovered that Sylvia had sent a few messages to her brother on that evening, but both of them deleted it shortly after, so the content of the messages remained unknown. Sylvia herself claimed she couldn't remember why she acted that way, what she had written to her brother, or how her blood ended up on Yara's clothing. In court, she refused to answer questions, just saying, "I don't know." Despite the lack of any clear explanation for these unexpected revelations, there was enough evidence to convict Bassetti. In the summer of 2016, he was sentenced to life in prison, and his lawyers were unable to overturn the verdict. It's worth mentioning that the day after the verdict, his wife visited him in prison and confessed that none of their 3 children were his, admitting she had been unfaithful with several other men. It's also notable that Esther's third child wasn't from her legal husband or Giuseppe, but from another man. Since then, Bassetti has remained in prison, but the story of Sylvia and her blood continues to trouble many who followed the case. Some people find it so suspicious that they question Bassetti's guilt and suggest that he might have been wrongfully accused, with the DNA evidence potentially being manipulated. Nevertheless, this case remains one of the most high-profile in modern Italian history, and all evidence was carefully examined by the country's leading experts, making the likelihood of the city's innocence extremely low. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.